What's up, everyone? My name is Pi. Welcome to SLR Lounge, where we're here to help you be a better photographer. And in this video, we're going to help you be a better photographer when it comes to photographing smoke. That's right, smoke. We've actually gotten quite a few requests for this type of a tutorial for how to shoot smoke, and we just finished up recording the entire smoke pack. We have a smoke pack which is now available as a new resource pack on SLR Lounge. It includes 400 smoke textures, everything from environmental fog to spewing smoke, fine match and cigarette smoke, and so forth. Everything for your smoke compositing needs. But in the process of the 4 weeks that it took to capture all these images, well, we learned a lot when it comes to how to photograph smoke, how to light it, how to shoot it, and so forth. And we thought this is a perfect time to answer all the questions, because photographing smoke is not only a little bit difficult, it is very fun. You can actually create really cool images, not just for composites, but for fine art type images. So we have a little tutorial series. We're going to show you how to shoot. We're going to show you how to post produce. We're going to show you how to add realistic smoke to your images, and so forth. So let's jump into it. Now, tip number one when photographing smoke is to use a telephoto lens. Let's show you the exact gear and the setup that we used. I was using the Canon 5D Mark III. We're shooting everything in full RAW, and we mounted it with a Canon 7200mm f2.8 Mark II. The reason why we're shooting telephoto is so that we can basically back up. We can place the camera and lens on a tripod, and notice that I have it mounted underneath the tripod, or sorry, underneath the lens mount, not underneath the camera. Well, there is a mount here, but that's not the one I'm using for it. We're also using a little bit of a heavier duty tripod. We're using the Benro, I believe we're using the either S4 or the S6 for this. I'll double check and we'll post it in the actual article. And the reason why is we want this to be very secure, very stable, and you want to mount here so that you're not basically placing all the weight on the camera with the lens kind of like tipping forward. It's not going to stay stable, and it's also not good for your tripod or for your camera. So we mount there, and then what we do is we zoom in and we control our composition with the zoom. So I can place the tripod, place the camera in a distance that's a little bit further back from the shoot area, and I can zoom in if I want to capture a little more detail on the area that I'm shooting. I can zoom out if I want to get more of that wisp kind of in the smoke and get more of the trail. Also, for smoke, we're generally shooting portrait aspect ratio. If you're shooting environmental fog, it's cool. You shoot it landscape or portrait, either way. Landscape is kind of preferred when I'm shooting like fog and those kind of things, because that's generally how I drop it into an image. But with smoke trails and whatnot, we want to give as much room and as much resolution for that smoke to move. If we're shooting at landscape, then basically we're losing resolution on the sides, and we're also not catching enough of that trail as it goes up and out of the frame. So shoot portrait aspect ratio for those. As for lighting, now you can use studio strobes, you can use pocket strobes, but we were using studio strobes, and I'm going to talk about why when we get to that portion. To trigger the camera, we're also using a Velo shutter boss. So this guy plugs into the shutter release, and we're using this so that I can work with the smoke and take shots and whatnot, and then we just simply trigger whenever we need the camera to fire to capture, you know, the perfect pattern and whatnot, the perfect trail. Then we fire this. If you're using pocket strobes, then kind of our preferred method to trigger is a PocketWizard Plus 3 or the PocketWizard X's. For the studio strobes, we're using the Cyber Commander that comes with the Einsteins, and that's a little bit of kind of a train wreck to use as far as the UI, and I know I talk about it all the time, but it does work nicely. It allows us to control the power of the flashes from the camera, which is nice too. Okay, so once we get everything set up, it's all pre-lit, everything is kind of dialed in, and then all we're going to do is sit there and work with the smoke to get the shot that we need. Tip number two is to use a pure black background, and do not rely on your strobe to basically overpower the smoke and send the background to black, because generally it doesn't work that well. And also you're using tons of flash power, and it's going to reduce recycle time, and it's going to reduce your flash duration. So your flash duration will increase your flash duration, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. But basically you're not going to get the most sharp smoke textures out of it. It's just not a good idea. And I'm going to show you exactly why. So basically what I would recommend is getting a seamless. You can use a seamless backdrop, just a black one with a matte finish, or you can use a piece of matte poster board, whatever you need to do to send the background to complete black. And this is why. So I have a file loaded up here, and this is actually the image that we're going to be working on later on. We're going to show you guys how to create this image where we add kind of a little bit of environmental smoke and also smoke coming from her mouth and so forth, all in post. But let's say, for example, if I take an image that has a pure black background. So any one of the ones from the smoke pack, they've been shot correctly and they've been post-produced, so the backgrounds are pure black. Watch what happens. Happens. I'm going to grab this and drag and drop it into our frame. And what I'll do is I'll just shrink this up to roughly the size that I would want it and put it right here. And all I'm going to do now is set the blend mode to screen. Once it's set on screen, everything drops away. We have nothing but just the smoke. I can move this and frame it wherever I want, and then simply mask out any edge that I don't want to appear. Like say, if the smoke is touching an edge up here, then I would just mask that out. If I don't want to show the source point down here, I can choose wherever I want it to start and mask that piece out. But watch this. If I grab a smoke texture, this was shot incorrectly, and we didn't post-produce it so that the background was completely black. I'm just going to say OK. Now I'm going to drag and drop this in, and then we're going to shrink this up, and watch what happens here. When I send this to screen blend mode, you see what happens to that background? It doesn't go black, or it doesn't disappear. So we actually have this background regardless of where we go, and even if I were to mask that, it's still not going to look good because the mask is going to be, well, it's still going to show like gray areas underneath the smoke in this area. So it's a real pain in the butt to get something to look right if you don't have that pure black background and you don't post-produce it correctly. So we're going to go over a separate tutorial when it comes to post-producing for composite textures and post-producing for fine art textures, because those are two completely different things, and we'll show you both ways. Again, if you have the smoke pack, all 400 images have already been post-processed, shot and post-processed to be pure black. So you just drop them in, set it to screen, and you're good to go. Tip number 3 is to use a studio strobe versus a pocket strobe. Now this is the Einstein 640 watt second strobe, and this is a LumaPro LP180 pocket strobe. Now why would we say to use the studio strobe versus a pocket strobe? Well, there's a few reasons actually. One of the main reasons is that we want to get a more kind of even light across that entire smoke area. So in the entire trail that goes up, we don't want to have hot spots on any middle portion of the light of the smoke or anything like that. We want the light to be even from top to bottom. Now using studio strobes and studio modifiers, it's much easier to get that light to be even from top to bottom. We found that when we're using a pocket strobe, the kind of modifiers that we have for it generally are going to give us a little bit of a hot spot kind of in certain areas of the smoke, which really isn't a big issue. You don't even notice it when you're doing, like, say, portraits, but on smokes type stuff where it's very technical, very detailed, you would notice it a little bit, and you have to kind of fix it in post. But this goes down to tip number 4 as well. This is the next reason why you want to use a studio strobe over a pocket strobe, and I'm going to demonstrate this for you. Let me turn this guy on. Tip number 4 is flash duration. Now if I have this at 1/16 power, okay, and I test just by firing this guy, you'll look at it and you'll go, hey, that flash is firing pretty instantaneously. But it actually isn't. Flashes, they have a flash duration. And what that flash duration is the power or the amount of time that it takes for the flash to power up and fire at that peak setting and then to drop off where it's not putting out any more light. Now it looks instantaneous, especially when we're at 1/16 power. I just flashed myself. There's a mirror right here and I totally just blinded myself. That was awesome. But it's actually not instantaneous. And so at 1/16 power, the flash duration might be extremely quick. It might be like, say, 1/4000th, 1/5000th of a second, even quicker than that. I don't know the exact number because every flash is going to vary. But when I power this up, let's say that I need to get more light out of this, because for a pocket strobe, I probably need to be shooting this at 1/1 to be able to get a good exposure when it's shot through a modifier on my smoke. Because I'm shooting the smoke at, like, say, f7. So at 1/1, if I click test now, the flash duration is actually much, much longer. So at 1/1, my flash duration might be 1/200th of a second, 1/250th of a second, because it takes more time for the flash to ramp up, fire off, and then drop off. What that means is smoke is a very quick moving object or subject that you're shooting. If the flash duration is affecting the smoke for 1/200th of a second, 1/250th of a second, then it's not going to completely freeze the smoke. You're not going to get the most detail. It's going to be kind of wispy in the shot. To get the most detail of the smoke, we need to be shooting at a much faster flash duration, which means that, well, for this strobe, we'd have to dial it down to 1/8, 1/16 power. But then we don't get enough light. By using a studio strobe, I can put this at full power at 640 watt seconds. I can put this at 1/16 power. It's going to be shooting out probably 6 to 8 times the amount of power as one of these guys at the same setting. So at 1/16 power on this, we're getting 1/6, maybe 1/8 the amount of light that we're getting on this guy. This will allow me to still shoot at, say, f5.6, f7, get enough light, and keep the flash duration extremely quick, so that way we're completely freezing the smoke. Okay? So that's tip number 4, is be mindful of your flash duration. Remember that flash duration changes not only based on power settings, but also based on the type of strobe and the brand of strobe that you're using. Tip number 5 is to edge light the smoke to get the best effect. Now when it comes to lighting, we don't want to front light the smoke. We don't want to light from the hot shoe because it's going to create flat lighting. We're going to kill all of our detail in the smoke. We're also going to need a hot spot right in the middle. We don't want to backlight the smoke because we're kind of doing the same thing. It's going to flat light, but just from the back of it, and then it's going to come straight through. It's going to hit the lens. It's going to flare. We're going to have a giant hot spot in the middle. You're killing all your detail. Just not good. All in general. What I want to do is sandwich light the smoke, and I'm going to demonstrate this by putting my pocket wizard. My pocket wizard is going to be the smoke in this example, okay? So from the hot shoe, the smoke is rising up here. And these are the studio strobes. These are not pocket strobes. But what we're going to do is we're going to sandwich that smoke just like this. So we're firing from the left, we're firing from the right, and that way, with the light coming from both sides of the smoke, we're going to get nice detail. We're going to get edge lighting across the smoke. It's going to create a beautiful look to that smoke, which is going to catch all the detail and so forth. Now, tip number 6 is to use a strip box with a grid as your modifier for those lights. This is the strip box for the Einstein, and you can see the grid on the inside. Now, what the strip box does is it's going to give me a nice even light from top to bottom, and it's going to prevent that light from coming out the sides, basically from the box. But the grid is going to do an even better job of that. The grid is going to funnel the light forward, almost like a giant snoot kind of, but for the softbox. So it's going to basically funnel that light forward, not allow light to fall out of the edges, which is going to spill onto the background and might spill into the camera, create a flare, or make our background not be completely black. So using the grid is going to help you to really control that light. So a gridded strip box on both sides of the smoke is really the best bet. If you do not have a studio strobe, if you're using pocket strobes, you can still get these grids for it. Okay, now obviously this grid is not going to put out light in the same amount of area as this one, but you can still do smaller smoke textures, smaller effects, and so forth with something like this. And it'll basically just go over the front of your strobe and funnel light forward, so it's not going to spill off the edges and get into the camera. Tip number 7 is to use open spaces when it comes to shooting large smoke effects like environmental fog and smoke. Use a large open space. Use a smaller space and an indoor space when you're shooting basically fine smoke and fine kind of more delicate smoke textures. So for example, the environmental fog shots that you guys see in the smoke pack, those were all shot outdoors, and the reason for this is because we're using a Roscoe 1900 fog machine, okay? We're putting out tons of fog, and this thing is actually far too much fog machine for what we're doing with it. The thing is designed to fill up an entire stadium. We needed the Roscoe little tiny baby brother that is designed to fill up a little area. But this guy puts out so much fog, and when you're doing environmental type fog, you're going to get a lot of fog in the area. You want that fog to dissipate quickly, and to do that you need to be outdoors or in an extremely well ventilated area. Because what we want to do is we want that fog to come in, we want to capture a couple different shots, move it around a little bit, capture some shots, and then let it dissipate and redo it again. If you're shooting indoors, that fog never dissipates, and so basically all you have is just this gray mist everywhere, and you have no detail in the shot. It just looks gray everywhere, and the fog will fill up the room, and it's just not a good thing. We know this. We tried it. So if you're shooting smaller or more delicate smoke textures, like say off of the matches and off the incense that you see in the resource pack, those you want to do indoors, because what we found is that even when shooting outdoors on a perfectly calm day, there's still always a little bit of movement in the air, okay? So even when you can't feel the wind, it's still moving a little bit, and it's going to affect basically the smoke trail quite a bit. Any small movement in the air affects those smoke trails. So to get the best smoke trails, go indoors and shoot those indoors just away from a smoke detector or something. It's not going to fill up an entire room of smoke, so it doesn't really need to be in a well ventilated area or anything. It's just gonna be a little tiny bit of smoke each time. But what that allows you to do is be in an area where the air is completely still, and then you can modify kind of the smoke path, and we're going to talk about that in just a second by using certain objects like a blower or things like that. So bigger the effect, go outdoors. Smaller and more delicate the kind of texture you're creating, go indoors and shoot them there. Of course, have the right safety stuff if you're working with fire indoors. Tip number 8 is to use a variety of subjects to create the type of smoke that you want. Everything is going to create a different look to the smoke. From a cigarette to a match to incense to cigars to pieces of paper lit up, which might be a little bit dangerous, do not do that, to fog machines, and then even for fog machines they have different types of fog. They have clear fog, they have regular fog, they have haze fog. Every one of these is going to create kind of a different look, so play around and see what you like. As for what we were doing, we probably found that the matches made the best smoke trails, and also the incense. Those were our two favorites for that. But really you can play with anything. Things like paper is too cumbersome. It's a little bit dangerous as well. It does work, but it's just you create much bigger fires. So be very safe and careful if you are using objects like that. Be very safe regardless. We, by the way, had a bucket of water just next to wherever we're shooting. Anytime we're working with fire, we have a bucket of water present. We have a fire extinguisher, and we're working in an area where we don't have a smoke detector because we don't want to set one off. So be safe when shooting. Tip number 9 is to bring along plenty of grip gear. Let me go over some of our favorites. Number 1, probably the most useful for a shoot like this is the A-clamp. This is something that's just a studio must have. You got to have A-clamps in the studio. They're only $1 or $2 a piece. So just get like 20 of them, leave them in your studio. They're really handy. But basically this would be our holder for incense and for matches and so forth. We'd place it right inside. We could take the rubber tips off so they won't melt. And then we just hold it and it'd hold it straight up and we could shoot our images. The other thing that's nice is a apple box. Now this is a half apple box. But basically, with the apple boxes, you can use these to prop up your smoke to get it to, or prop up the object that's creating the smoke to get it into the right area of the image. So if you're working with fire as well, you can also use this and wet it. So you can actually wet it completely down so it's not going to catch on fire. It's going to be very safe. You can soak it as well. Whereas compared to like if you're just to use a cardboard box and you're actually lighting matches on top of it, that's a really dangerous thing. Remember? The whole safety side of things. So the apple box is really nice to be able to place that smoke exactly where you want it. And it's also nice to sit on. I love apple boxes for sitting on. Okay, other pieces of grip gear. Well, we have our little air grenade that you lob at people. No, you don't chuck this at people. That would be rude. But this air grenade, they're not called air grenades, they're just blowers. We typically would use to blow out our lenses. And for modifying kind of a smoke trail, it works incredibly well. And you don't need a lot, by the way. When you're modifying a smoke trail, it's just kind of like a little tiny wisp. A wisp of smoke. The nice thing about this is that it's more easily controllable than just, say, blowing on it. That's not very easy to control. And also, if I want to blow from the back, well, that's going to be really hard to get my head and neck shaped in a way that I can, unless I'm a giraffe. If I'm a giraffe, I could probably blow from the back. But I can go from the back and give a little gust of wind, go from the side, give a little bit, go from each side until I get the right look. And then once I do, remember, trigger with your wireless trigger. All right, so there's that guy. Let's see, what else do we have? We have this, which is my scented candle. This is my scented candle for this room, actually, because this room is very poorly ventilated. But a glass jar. And the glass jar is fantastic for basically capturing smoke. So you can basically catch the smoke and you can release, catch and release. Kind of like fish, you know, like in a river, catch and release, except it's smoke, not fish. So catch and release, and then as you are releasing the smoke, you're going to fire whenever you get the right kind of look. You can also use it to smother the smoke, which is really nice. You can put out your incense or put out your matches and so forth. That's it when it comes to the modifiers. Let's go to our final tip. Tip number 10 plays into our next 2 tutorials, and that's to take the smoke texture in its raw form from the camera and to post-process it. We would post-process a raw texture differently depending on what we're going to use it for. So if we're using it for compositing, we're going to post-process for a very neutral kind of look that will drop over and lay into any image and be perfect. Okay, we'll show you that in the next tutorial. The tutorial following that, we're going to show you how to post-produce a fine art type texture. So a smoke piece that we want to turn into a fine art texture that we might want to put up on a wall or so forth. That's going to be a more stylistic process to post-processing the smoke and not like a neutral process. That's it for our 10 tips when it comes to photographing smoke. If I were to add on a bonus tip, a tip number 11, it would be to be patient, okay? Smoke is very difficult to deal with. It's very kind of, well, unpredictable. You never know what that smoke trail is going to give you with every single object. You could be shooting a match, and every single time you light it, it's going to do something completely different. In addition, at different points in its, well, I'm going to use a pi technical term, in its combustion cycle. I don't know if that's the right word. If there's any firemen out there, you can let me know. But basically, when you're lighting up a match, when you're lighting up an incense, it's going to create a different smoke than when you're putting it out, than when it's lit. Then, you know, at each different point in its combustion cycle, it creates a different type of smoke. So keep that in mind. You can get 3-4 different types of smoke just from a match itself. And every time you shoot it, the trail is going to look completely different. You can modify, you can do tons of different things. It's going to take a little bit of time. Be patient, keep on working with it, because when you do get that really cool fine art shot or that really cool texture shot, it's a great feeling. It's very satisfying. I hope y'all enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please be sure to click like on YouTube. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Help us out, spread the word about SR Lounge so we can keep on doing what we're doing and helping you all be a better photographer. My name is Pi, and I'll see you all in the next video.